There are many examples of where when we design for everyone and we do have equity and inclusion, there are better results. But it's not just about results, it's about fairness and making sure that individuals can realize their potential. I'm Bill Curtis-Davidson, and I go by he, him pronouns. I identify as a gay man. I am married and have been for almost 20 years, so I identify as a husband. I also, with my husband, have been raising two now young adults who are getting ready to graduate from high school. I identify as a parent. I'm an inclusive design and technology accessibility leader. Inclusive design is really designing technology services and experiences so that anyone can enjoy them no matter what their background, ability, if they have a cognitive, sensory, or physical disability, or even a temporary limitation or chronic condition. And really the goal is to make things that are better for everyone to use. For the first part of my life until age 12, I lived in upstate New York in a very rural area. I was born in a town of about 200 people. Think dairy farmland, pastoral landscapes. Everybody knew everybody's business, and it was a very small, tight-knit community, not very diverse. At age 12, my parents and our family moved to Central Florida, where we were still living in a rural area, but now living in a place that had over maybe 10,000 people. It was quite a different environment, even at the time, which would have been around 1980. It was still a lot more diverse than what I was moving from. And so that was kind of the environment that I was in during the early part of my life. I currently live in Atlanta, and I have done so since I left home. I've lived there for over 35 years. When I was in my K through 12 high school years, there was just no question in my mind I was an artist and I was going to become an artist, whatever that meant. And I really did not at the time have any clear idea of what that would mean other than making art, and going to art school was a big goal. And this was interesting for me because I graduated in the top of my class and there was a lot of pressure for me pursuing other career options. But definitively, I just was so involved in the arts that it was just not going to be anything but that. I was one of the first people in my family to go to college. Choosing art school is, there's still negativity associated with that. The stereotype of artists not making money or not being happy was something that I experienced on top of being a closeted gay teen. When I was in elementary school, even as far back as that, I did feel a little different. I seemed to enjoy my time with male friends more than others, but really that was not brought into more clarity until I was a teenager, maybe around 13 or so. I started feeling more sexually aware, and that's when I felt like, okay, I'm attracted to male people. So that became very clear, really, in my early teens. Absolutely not. And in fact, it largely was because of the rural nature of where I lived. This was a different time. It was the 1980s. We were in a different cultural moment. The environments I was in as a teenager in Central Florida were pretty hostile in terms of diversity. I remember seeing the F word written on buildings, so I did not have access. The only exception to that was when I became more involved in art. In high school, I ended up traveling and exhibiting my art in shows in different places all around the region and the state. And I remember meeting, in a couple of occasions, gallery people who were openly gay or LGBTQ identified, and I would talk with them. And it was the first time I actually had a chance to talk with people and feel like I could let my guard down a little bit. It was kind of like going from night to day. When I moved to Atlanta in the mid-'80s, it was like the floodgates open for diversity. People were whoever they wanted to be. And in fact, being in art school was probably the best choice I could have made because it was actually part of the experience to explore your identity, to think about other people's identities and what we're communicating with each other when we make art and we design things. That's really what it was all about. And so it was perfect in that way. It was also quite a vibrant scene. I lived in Midtown Atlanta, which has been a gay mecca part of Atlanta. Now there's like a lot of them. RuPaul was still in clubs, local clubs in Atlanta. So I would go out, see different things going on that were just never a possibility where I lived before. I think I was kind of out like the first day I moved out of my parents' house and went there. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but you get the point. It was very welcoming. And I don't think in a way there was really much distinguishing between queer and non-queer because everything was fair game for exploration. We were just at that time and everybody was there to do that. And it was also a small environment, maybe a couple hundred people in each class. It wasn't very overwhelming. It felt like a family. I did a lot of different kinds of classes, philosophy, and all sorts of different topics. I was always the kind of artist that was experimenting with different media. My degree is actually even individualized in fine art. It's drawing, printmaking, computer graphics. At the time, computer graphics were, quote, new because personal computers were really just starting at the time. I always was working on technology as well, like using photography and then making an etching. My educational path kind of went through a media exploration in a way versus honing in on a craft as some artists do. They might become more of a painter or a sculptor. My pathway was a lot more variegated. I always joke that it was a little bit more confusing for me when I was in that time period, but now in retrospect, it makes sense that I was looking at a lot of different media and then getting involved in technology. Some years after graduating with my bachelor's in fine art, I went to Georgia Tech in what was at the time new media and now is human computer interaction. So I was dealing with design and user experience, sort of the meaning for how you design things. So my pathway kind of wandered through all of that and then found a focus in designing for humans and for usability and for a purpose that was defined. Keeping in mind at the time when computers were first utilized, we would use them maybe for one thing, like maybe for designing desktop publishing, like designing a flyer that we used to do with more physical collage and then photocopying or video editing, right? Or I did a lot of early video editing in some of those first computer platforms, really creating kind of art videos and projects with my collaborators. All through that, it was definitely a lot of collaboration, having a grounding in the fine arts and about sort of meaning making and what it means to design something and have it express a thought or to evoke a response. It sort of grounded me in thinking about the purpose of design and what we're doing. And inclusive design came to me later in my master's degree study program at Georgia Tech. I was exposed to people with disabilities as part of my cohort and my work and ended up taking a job researching assistive technologies and learning about how humans with varying abilities or constraints adapt and design technology. And it was very fascinating to me to think about how adaptive people are, not just inside their own identity, but physically with their bodies. They become adapted to what they're doing. When we design and make things more universally usable, it benefits a lot of people. Early in my K through 12 experience, I do recall having a male teacher when I was in elementary school who seemed to really resonate that I was an artist and was excited about that in a way that was really supportive. And then in high school, I had two very significant role models. One was an unlikely one since I was a super geeky artist nerd. I had a role model who was a cross-country coach. She invited me to become a cross-country athlete, which I never conceived of myself, and turned out to be a pretty big role model. I ended up becoming a cross-country runner and actually the MVP of my senior years. So it was really an unexpected angle of support that I hadn't experienced. But the most important mentor I had was hands down my high school art teacher, whose name was Lois. And Lois was an amazing woman who had no boundaries. She was very adept at every kind of medium in art and really trained me in being insatiably curious about all things art and about expanding my horizons, traveling. She was an avid traveler and had gone to China and all sorts of places. What's really special to me is that she remained my friend and mentor until last year when she passed away at a very ripe old age. Over the years, I've had occasion to be a mentor in an LGBTQ groups where we were looking at how to build professional skills and the resource groups. I have done reverse mentoring where we involve people who identify as LGBTQ and reverse mentor executives or people in different regions of the world. In the case of myself, I was working for a large international company, reverse mentoring people as far away as Singapore or Australia, Japan. And you find, of course, around the world, people who identify as LGBTQ have different experiences based on the cultures that they are a part of. And so do the managers in a company that may have a certain policy for inclusion. So I had a lot of experience doing that. And then, of course, I've also done a huge amount and still do a lot of mentoring in accessibility. I have served as an advisor to the Next Gen Accessibility movement, where we're working to try to make sure we have talent working in inclusive design and accessibility, making sure to pay it forward and get people excited about inclusive design and specifically disability inclusion. Because honestly, we can all acquire a disability at any point in our lives and we all get older. It's something that can really be universal in a way that maybe some other diversity factors can't. When I was in art school at the Atlanta College of Art, I had an incredible mentor named Larry Jens Anderson. He was one of the first friends I had who was a gay male in a relationship. He was with his partner many years until he died last year. He was a very vibrant artist, very skilled and enthusiastic, very critical of what was happening in society, and built a lot of sort of activist art projects with collaborators. That experience was really impactful for me to see someone, instead of being shut in, using their perspective to try to push back against what was happening. And what we were experiencing at the time with the onset of HIV and AIDS, I think most people understand that it was viewed as a gay plague or gay disease, which is not the case, of course. As much as all of us were talking about that, there was an evolution of understanding about the disease as well. It was a very tough time. And what was interesting at the time is because technologies were not as prevalent as they are today, art and doing installations, doing events were really important to raise awareness and to kind of push back against the messages that we were being buried in. So I really became involved in that. My work was exploring the identity that I had and the relationship I had to the world as a gay man. We were really fighting for our lives, literally. And many people I know passed away during that time, many artists I knew and others. And it was a very tough time. And I've even had people since passing away from this. Being an artist and making artwork that commented on the societal challenges we were going through was really an important moment of owning the power of making messages and pushing back and trying to be authentic and expressing our identities when that was not very welcome. And unfortunately, we still see that happening today when these movements happen and these really severe situations like the advent of HIV/AIDS. It was very tough. And it was tough to come out during that time. I remember some of my early attempts at having relationships or meeting people. It was really scary. And to have people passing away and to have the societal negativity coming at us was extra bad. But again, it was empowering to have the movement of being vocal about art. I had very significant moments in my career too, where before he passed away, Keith Haring, the artist, is quite famous, came to Atlanta for a solo show, and I had a chance to meet him. And it was just maybe a year before he passed away due to complications from HIV/AIDS. And you had this sense that we were all fighting for our lives expressing the world we wanted to see and challenging the power and the system that was in place to express all this negativity toward us. And eventually people understood that HIV/AIDS is not a gay disease, but we still have stigma about all of these things, as all of us know. And I actually appreciate that I came up during that time, although it was tough to have that experience. It shaped me quite a bit. I think I learned that there are systems of power in place in the world, and it's important that all of our voices be heard and that we create messages that are authentic and that challenge messages that are not correct, or they are really just to damage people or make them feel inferior. And so it gave me kind of an activist modality to my life that really did not exist. Before then, I was really more fascinated with the process of questioning myself and what my identity was and exploring how to create. But it then became something bigger, like it was something about challenging the status quo. I have been given opportunities to work in areas where essentially I'm designing for diversity. For 15 years, I worked at IBM. I did a lot of LGBTQ mentoring. I worked in the ERG space. I worked as a technology leader, and there was a supportive environment for that. And working in disability inclusion and accessibility overlaid on top of that. And in other jobs I've had since, including in my current company, Cadmus, I have been able to be a part of building diversity networks and programs. It's a space where it's quite easy for me to be authentic and share my own lived experience as a part of building out those programs and being a contributor to them. I have also had the opportunity to be a part of or contribute to building employee resource groups and diversity groups in companies that I've worked for. So employee resource groups serve a number of different purposes. They're really usually led by HR or a diversity function in a company, and they can be in small companies or large companies. The important part is that they exist, and they exist usually for some main reasons, including making sure that people who identify as parts of community or different diversity traits, then they have a way to share and network with each other. And it's part of making sure the workplace is inclusive and that their voices are able to be heard. Employee resource groups also can be used to help companies innovate, which is the area I have focused in more than I have the HR part of it. When I was recently working at an immersive technology company leading accessibility, we built an ERG for disability inclusion and accessibility, but we also had ERGs for LGBTQIA, women, people of color, etc. And we were able to use those employee resource groups to help make sure that in product development or sales processes, things like that, that there was thought and consideration and involvement directly by people with different lived experience. And so that's the part that excites me more, is more the innovation side. It is really important, though, that there be an environment where people can be hired and be authentically themselves and feel safe to be authentic at work, and to feel like there are others there so they feel a sense of belonging. Maybe it'd be helpful to give some examples of inclusive design. I've been excited to have opportunities through my career. One that I think many people may know about or maybe haven't thought about but probably seen is accessible air travel. So the next time you're in an airport and you look at an airport self-check-in kiosk, you might notice that there's a headset jack and a special keypad on them. Those are some of the features that make a touchscreen device accessible to people, for example, who are blind, who may not be able to see the touchscreen, or someone who has a physical disability and may not be able to move their hand and touch a screen. They may have a prosthetic hand or may not have a hand. I was instrumental in, fortunately, being in the right place at the right time, working for IBM when it was a major supplier of airline kiosks, working in accessibility at IBM, and IBM was also working on the international common use self-service standards for the air travel industry. I worked with the community, with government authorities, and with the supply chain partners to prototype in a very creative way what did not exist, which was an accessible airline kiosk. some people may wonder, why do we want to make all of this accessible, right? The reason why is because people with disabilities, like all of us, want to pursue their lives and operate in the world independently. It's a key trait of our disability rights movement that people should not have to rely on others to be in the world and to work and do what they do. I've also been involved in a variety of other inclusive design projects like accessible self-service multifunction machines, so copiers, those kinds of things, where you think about being in an office where you might make a printout. We print from a computer. We might be able to use the computer. For example, if you're blind and you use a screen reader, you might be able to send the print job, but then you have to go to the printer and get it. There are all these breakpoints in the way our world is designed that break inclusion. And then most recently, I've been working, as I have in my whole career, I pursue new technologies, and whether it was at the time new internet technologies, but now I'm working in spaces like AI and extended reality. And I've helped build communities like the XR accessibility community, where we're looking at how immersive technologies like augmented and virtual reality need to be designed for diverse human bodies. These spatial technologies almost require thinking about diverse bodies because they're spatially experienced. And as soon as we're not looking at a flat screen, but we're looking around the space around us and we see digital content in our space, we experience that in an embodied way. Inclusive design is becoming critical to the success of designing for new technologies like that. And then in AI, there's a lot of work on inclusive design, but it gets into interesting areas where bias can not just be in the way the user interface is designed, but the way the algorithm or the system is working. And it could do harm to people if it actually, for example, rejects them when their resume does not fit a certain pattern. One takeaway from my own story is this was not a straight path. And if we design systems so we assume everyone's the same, in automation and with AI specifically, there are some major harms that can happen. People with disabilities identify differently. Some people have a disability, but they don't identify as disabled. For example, a deaf person may not feel like they identify as disabled. They're part of deaf culture, and it's a positive culture experience for them. It is their culture. There's a whole language. There are different languages around the world. So when we're designing these systems, we may assume that there's one way to design for that, but in reality, people identify differently. And I think in LGBTQ as well, if we look at, gender identity, for example, the way that a form is designed or the way a system's designed to presume some kind of human type that would use it, I think there are some similarities in designing for diverse ability or identities of disability or ability. And also LGBTQ, I think I've seen some similar situations where we really can't design gay, lesbian, bi, trans, right? There's so many combinations. And so designing for flexibility and user choice and combinations of needs are really important. And so that's some of the similarities I've seen crossing over from my focus professionally on accessibility and disability inclusion, and also the identities of LGBTQIA people. What equity would look like is to make sure that in our organizations we have policies to make sure we're including people with diverse backgrounds, that there's support resources, that people are able to authentically bring themselves to work and to their life's task. They're judged more on what they do versus who they are and how they identify. One key aspect that I and others work on is making sure there are people with direct, diverse lived experiences actually building and making things. We don't want to just consult them like during a user study or at the end before you release something, right? You must have people with diverse experiences. Oftentimes you will not be able to anticipate user needs or perspectives that someone may have on using any given product or technology unless you have a diverse team. And oftentimes we do not have enough diversity. In some, it's been well researched and reported that in different settings, we might have mostly white people or mostly male people who identify as male working in different parts of technology design. There have been a number of occasions where people might try to design an invention like a sign language glove that uses AI to speak out loud words that are signed in gesture. And some of these work well, but if you don't design it understanding how people that are native sign language users communicate with their whole body, not just their hands, right, their facial expressions, etc., you actually will design something that won't work. These are really important reasons why you have to have people with lived experience helping co-design the solutions. We are so barraged with negativity towards our community, and we continue to have that, unfortunately. What I think it would be great is if LGBTQ people have less systemic barriers and they're able to pursue having a family, growing into the career they want to be in. My experience, and I think everyone probably listening to this interview has their own experiences of exclusion, barriers, and challenges. And unfortunately, as LGBTQ people, we do confront those, and they seem to still persist and sometimes get quite severe even today. And it's shocking in a way to me to feel like there's progress made and to still have what's happening in many of our communities and with our politics and other spaces. It's in a way shocking what's happening. And so I would like to see less of that and more general acceptance, which frankly, I feel like that in my community. I feel accepted in my community. This phase of my career, I am more and more thinking about how can I have broader impact. It's twofold. It's a multiplying impact on a broader level, but it's also paying it forward. Being a mentor is really important to me. I am hugely appreciative of the Paths program and what you're trying to do for LGBTQ people who want to pursue these careers. I want to be able to do as much as I can to encourage groups and individuals to pursue their passions, and that's becoming more and more important. I think as I get more gray hair, I'm going to be wanting to be on advisory committees or more boards, and I've been doing more of that along with my main role at work. So I foresee that in my future. So if I could zoom back in time and have the experiences I've had and give advice to my younger self, it would be to be okay with the fact that your journey is going to be wandering through a lot of phases. We don't decide what we're going to want to be, we become who we are. And I think my journey has shown me that all of the pieces that seemed so disparate and that seemed to be not really related to each other actually combined in a way to make me who I am. And I think they make me a richer, more experienced person. And it's not a path that is easily defined ahead of time. So I would tell myself to just enjoy that journey. If you identify as LGBTQIA and you want to go into STEAM, understand that having your unique identity and experiences gives you perspective that is valuable. And you should identify what is that perspective and figure out a way to apply it. My unique perspective was a part of what I did. It became fodder for me making art. It was part of why I was doing it, and it became an incentive to be an activist and to speak out and to own a certain power of perspective. Creative invention and innovation relies on people who think differently.